So we welcome you, ma'am, and uh, today's session that is remembering the great legend of Indian poetry, Jayanta Mahapatra. Uh, if I'm asked about Jayant Mahapatra, how to describe him, uh, it's like there is a river flowing, and in it, a boat carrying a man with large eyes, and with him some children. The children look like poems, and the man is ferrying them across to the other side. During the ride, he is telling them stories about life and death, about people he has lost, about villages and goddesses. And then the river disappears. All that remains is ash. If I were to have a dream about Jayant Mahapatra's poetry, it would be something like this. I heard him speaking in the year 2019 uh, when he said that life and poetry are interlinked. And this is what we surely get in his poetries. For the welcome address, I would like to invite our head of the department, Dr. S.M. Yahya Ibrahim. Sir,
Okay, audible.
uh, voice is very low, sir,
Okay, I think that
but
it is better
it is
now.
audible. It is audible.
Ah, Thank you so much, Saket. Dear students, let us join your teachers in welcoming a personality who herself is a creative writer, an academic, a critic, and a very renowned scholar of folklore in India. Nandini ma'am, we are truly grateful that you accepted our request. It's a very solemn occasion because we are remembering such a towering figure of Indian English poetry who has left us very recently. And the academic fraternity, the writers fraternity across India and across the globe, they are feeling this loss. Uh, I also, at this juncture, would like to welcome all our students who have thought it suitable that by joining this event, they are also becoming a part of paying our homage to the great legend of Indian poetry, Queen Jayant Mahapatra. So, on behalf of the department, madam, on behalf of the management of our college, and also on behalf of all our students in the department, we heartily welcome you, ma'am, and we are extremely grateful that you are here. I would like to end, or rather, I would like to request Saket once again to continue. Before that, I would like to just recite two, three lines from Mahapatra's poetry. It's a very famous poem titled Screen, and the line goes like this. A screen never ends. It strives to be kind, but our hatred keeps coming between us. The night stands like a conqueror over it. The sphere of darkness held in her hand, the center of everything. So, dear students, this was Jayant Mahapatra sir, and certainly Nani Man's lecture today, the Nani Man's homage today will attract you to learn more and to read more of Jayant Mahapatra sir's poetry. Uh, as I said, that Nani Man is a very brilliant poet and a very famous creative writer across India nowadays. So, Nandini ma'am's three lines are here. With this, I would like to welcome her also here. Who says death is the only truth? Who says death is the only truth? See, your body of fog is still seated on the throne. You still shine in the firmament of the stars. So, a heartiest welcome to you, Nandini. Saket, unmute please. Saket, Saket. Ma'am, I think there is some trouble or technical trouble from the side of Saket.
No, I don't have any technical problem, but I can see that Dr. Saket's audio is blinking. So maybe he is having some problem,
Yes,
right?
yes,
Yes.
he is right.
His audio is continuously blinking.
So I personally request you, ma'am, that let us begin. Let us to start our homage to the great poet. Saket will connect with us after the lecture.
And I can see so many people in front of me that I really don't know which one is my camera. I'm looking everywhere.
Okay, am I audible? Am I audible?
Yes, now you are audible.
Yes.
Okay, very sorry, there was some technical issues.
Yes.
Hopefully, it has been rectified. Thank you so much, sir. Uh, I'm pursuing my research on Jayanta Mahapatra, and I would like to say that I have been really motivated by Nandini ma'am. I met her in Delhi. She really motivated me and supported me to further go on with my particular topic, which I shared with her. And from then on, I have been working on Jayanta Mahapatra, sir, and 27th was not an easy day for me. Though I haven't met him, but yet I felt like that I have lost someone very close to me. To speak about Nandini ma'am, uh, Nandini ma'am is the best, has been the best Amazon uh, best-selling author in the year 2022. She is a major voice in contemporary Indian English literature, in English literature under the guidance of late Professor Niranjan.
Saket, unmute yourself. Your mic is having any problem. Ma'am.
Okay, am I audible now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, okay. Uh, Nandini ma'am has been widely published in India, USA, UK, Africa, Italy, Australia, and Pakistan. Apart from numerous other literary awards, she is a triple gold medalist in English literature. She has received the gold medal from the Honorable Vice President of India for her contribution to English studies in India in the year 2019. She is the author and editor of 20 books. Some of her works are The Other Voice, The Recollection as Redemption, The Postmodernist Delegation to English Language Teaching, The Post-Colonial Space, Writing the Self and the Nation, Silver Poems on My Lips, Folklore, The Alternative Modernities, Folklore, and The Alternative Modernities, Volume 2, uh, Sukama and Other Poems, Suvarna Rekha, Sita, Dynamics of Children's Literature, Zero Point, and Selected Poems of Nandini Sahu, Winter 2020 publication, Selected Poem of Nandini Sahu, Rereading Jayanta Mahapatra, A Song, Half and Half, Shading the Metaphors, Collected Poems of Nandini Sahu, and Collected Poems of Niranjan Mohanty. She is the former Director, School of Foreign Languages, and currently a professor of English at Indira Gandhi National Open University, New Delhi. Her areas of research interests cover Indian literature, new literature, folklore, and cultural studies, American literature. Children's literature and critical theory also is one of her interest areas. She is the chief editor, founder, editor of Interdisciplinary Journal of Literature and Language, a biannual peer-reviewed journal in English. Professor Sahu has designed multiple academic programs on cultural studies, American literature, post-colonial literatures, children literature, Indian folk literature, and Indian philosophical thoughts for IGNOU and many other universities. Currently, she is designing an MA program in Indian knowledge systems, which are inclined to comparative Indian literatures and cultures as well as Hindu studies. We welcome you, ma'am. The platform now is all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Saket, for this exhaustive introduction. I am so grateful to you for giving so much of information about my work to the students. Namaskar, Professor Ashok. Namaskar, Professor Yahya, and my good wishes to the entire faculty, particularly Dr. Saket and Dr. Vashudhara, and all the faculty members and the very dear students, research scholars, and other people who have joined this important program to have a dialogue on the poetry of the great Jayanta Mahapatra. I am indeed obliged to your college for giving me this opportunity, because Jayanta Mahapatra is so close to my heart. I practically grew up with him. I mean, reading his poetry, looking at him as my role model. I practically grew up, and I always wanted to have some kind of academic discourse on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, and today I got that opportunity, so I am extremely grateful to you. Well, I will try to keep it very, very objective and very, very impersonal. I will try to keep it related to only my research, but I don't know how far I will be successful because of my deeply personal relationship with the poet. And these are the two books on the poet Jayanta Mahapatra that this one, the edited books. One is Recollection as Redemption, and then the other one is Rereading Jayanta Mahapatra, and this was published in the year 2022. Already Dr. Saket talked about it, and I can fondly mention here that the cover, the back cover of the book was selected by none other than the Jayanta Mahapatra. He wanted me to keep this photograph. He said, Nandini, both of us look so happy here. Before I get into my serious academic discourse on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, please allow me to talk about my personal interactions with him. Just allow me for 5 minutes. In the year 1995 or 96, I met him for the first time in the PG Department of English, Barampur University, where I was the topper in the university, and there was a seminar on Indian English literature where poet Jayanta Mahapatra was the speaker along with poet Bipu Padi. Both of them came, and then we had a discourse on contemporary Indian literature and poetry, and I was so inspired by both of them, especially when Jayanta Mahapatra handed over the gold medal to me for being the topper of the university. I touched his feet and I gave him some of my poems. I was already writing poetry at that time. I was just a little girl. I have been writing poetry since I am 7 years old. And by the time I met Jayanta Mahapatra, I had written quite a few poems in English. And I had also received the first prize in All India Poetry Contest arranged by the Quest. And then I gave that poem to poet Jayanta Mahapatra. Then he said, you are a girl from a small town with big dreams, you will go places. And then looking at his compassionate and his kind face with so much of smile and love and affection and gentleness, I decided then and there that immediately after my post-graduation, I would do my PhD on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. Like Dr. Saket told just now that he's doing his poetry, his PhD on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, and he lives in his heart. Jayanta Mahapatra has that capacity. He can get into the heart and soul of people through his words, not just his words, but his gestures and his love. Till the end of his life, he was a lover of humanity. He loved everyone. He didn't discriminate. The other day, after the death of Jayanta Mahapatra, someone posted, many people posted their beautiful photographs with the poet on social media. Then somebody questioned that is Jayanta Mahapatra the most photographed poet and why? Then people are giving multiple answers to that. I did not write any answer there, but I think I can answer here that Jayanta sir was the most photographed poet because of his humbleness, his politeness. Unlike many celebrities who can be snooty, who can be inaccessible, Jayanta sir was never like that. In the literature festivals, in the poetry festivals, in seminars and conferences, whoever came to him with a mobile and told, sir, can I click a photo with you? He always patted the shoulder of that person and said, yes, definitely you can. And that's how everyone had a beautiful photograph with the poet Jayanta Mahapatra, and they're so precious. The photos are so precious. They talk about uh, a divine relationship between a poet and then his devotees and then his admirers. So many photographs I see, and I feel so good to look at his photographs. Anyway, after my PhD, I came to, well, during my PhD, I tried to take a couple of interviews with poet Jayanta Mahapatra, but he was not, I could not access him because at that time there was no internet. In 2001 to 2003, I did my PhD in 2003. It was awarded in 2003, and at that time we were not, we could not access the internet, so I could never take a proper interview with him. But a couple of telephonic interviews I had taken from with the poet, and I must say that all the interviews are so sketchy. They were never so clear. If you ask a question to the poet, Jayanta Mahapatra, you don't expect a very detailed answer. He was a man of few words when he spoke, and he was a man of a lot of words, only words. He was the word wizard when he wrote poetry. You can see his poetry. Many critics compare him with Kalidas, and some critics compare him with T.S. Eliot, some with W.B. Yeats. So he is the word wizard when it comes to poetry. His words broke the parapets of the river, and he wrote such beautiful words. He liberated English language. In a way, he created a new English language in the Indian English poetry scenario. And I was so fortunate to be knowing him personally. And after my PhD was awarded, I added some more chapters to the PhD thesis, and I published a book, Recollection as Redemption, a study in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. Then I added some more poets. And then I sent a copy of this book to the great Jayanta Mahapatra. And he was so happy to receive that book, and he kept it in his library. Even today, last year in 2022, when I visited him, I saw my book in a nice place, sitting cozy in his library, and I was so glad to see that. He valued relationships. He understood that a scholar has written a book with a lot of commitment and dedication, and he gave a lot of importance to that. And then last year, I went to his house, to Tinikonia Bagicha, Cuttack, with this book, Rereading Jayanta Mahapatra. You can see some YouTube video, Nandini Sahu in conversation with Jayanta Mahapatra, where I am sitting in the kitchen of Jayanta Mahapatra, sir, because it was difficult for him to walk. He was already 94 at that time, and a person of 94 years with so much of enthusiasm. But before a few days of that meeting, sir had fallen down and he had broken his knee, so he was not able to walk properly. And I went to his kitchen. Then when Sarojini Didi, his caretaker, she was cooking for me and my son. Then I told sir that this is the book, Rereading Jayanta Mahapatra. He told me, don't give me my book. You give me your poetry book. So then I gave him my poetry book, A Song Half and Half, which was the Amazon's best-selling poetry book at that time. And Jayanta sir told me that you read the introduction of this book. Let me read one of your poems, because your poems are so full of mythology, folklore, and you are such a renowned scholar and all that. He spoke so kindly, and he knew who is doing what. So he told that your poetry is full of mythology and folklore, so I will read one of your poems. And then we read for each other. And that small video which my son recorded on my mobile, we were not prepared for that kind of a video or anything. It was just an informal conversation in his kitchen when we were talking. My son recorded a video. Then I asked him, so can I share the video with people? He said, you share with everybody. Then I immediately put it on my YouTube channel. So you can just have a look at that. And then this year, there's so much to say about him that I'm really forgetting the chain of incidents. Poet Jayanta Mahapatra always wanted to go to Jagannath Puri. In my last lecture, I was telling that he told my teacher, Gopa sir, Professor Goparanjan Mishra, and me, he told us to take him to the Badadanda, to take him to Jagannath Puri. And then he was very fond of Podo Pitha. It is a traditional Odia dish. And Gopa sir's wife, Madam, who is a great lady, she used to cook Podo Pitha for him. And whenever I went to Bhubaneswar, me and then Gopa sir and Madam, we used to go to Jayanta sir's house with a Podo Pitha, and he relished that. And then in the introduction of this book, Rereading Jayanta Mahapatra, I have given a couple of incidents where Jayanta sir, in one of the literature festivals, he was hungry, but then there was no food for him because there was Chinese food and he was not able to eat that. Then I went to somebody's house and I collected some food for him, one Podo Pitha for him, and he was so happy. So, I had a very molten, mellifluous, very poetic relationship with him. He respected me. When I started my career as a creative writer, he treated me like a daughter. Then as time passed on and he became so senior, and then I also became a professor in IGNO, at that time I started treating him like a child. I used to tell him that you are my son. He would say, no, you are my granddaughter. I said, don't even say that you are my son. So next birth, you should be born to me as my son. So I would have two children, one my own son, then you will be my other son. I used to treat him like that. And I had such a close relationship with the poet, and his death, the day of his death, was not an easy day for me. I was constantly in touch with Gopa sir and taking his information from time to time. And ultimately it had to happen, and he left a void in Indian poetry scenario. But like Professor Yahya quoted one of my poems in the beginning itself, who says death is the only truth. Sir, thank you so much for quoting that poem. Yes, death is not the only truth. Today, Jayanta Mahapatra is no more physically. He has left the physical world, but the entire poetry fraternity, the entire literature fraternity all over the world, not just India, is reading the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. Whenever I go out of country, if I go to any seminar, any conference, workshop in any other country, the only question I get from people is, how is poet Jayanta Mahapatra? So he is so famous. And the kind of poetry he has written, it's very difficult. Like whenever I read T.S. Eliot, the poetry of T.S. Eliot, every time I find a different meaning. The meaning of the poetry of T.S. Eliot actually suits my moods. The day I am happy, I read his poetry as romantic poetry. The day I am sad, his poetry resonates with my thoughts. Similar is the case with the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. His words will match your moods. Whatever you are thinking, you will feel that he has responded to you in his poetry. He is that kind of a word wizard. Well, and then this book, now coming to the academic part of this discussion, of course, I will get back to the personal interaction off and on. Coming to the academic part of this lecture, this special lecture, let me start with some research that I did in this book, Rereading Jayanta Mahapatra. In the introduction, in the preface of this book, I have written, I am quoting myself, just one sentence I'll quote. This book is the tribute, highest respect from a young poet to a senior poet, from a devotee to divinity incarnate to the idol embodied. So he was the idol of not just me, he was the idol of many people. In the year 2006, when I came to IGNO to join as a faculty here, I saw that one or two poems of Jayanta Mahapatra were in the syllabus of our BA and MA courses. But I made it a point to introduce as many number of poems of Jayanta Mahapatra as possible in our BA and our creative writing programs, in our BA English and MA English. And today, I have introduced so many of his poems in so many of the academic programs and courses in not just IGNO, my university. Wherever I go as a member of the Board of Studies, to any Indian university or to any international university, I feel this is my moral responsibility to take Jayanta Mahapatra everywhere. So I make it a point to introduce his poetry everywhere. And when Dr. Saket came to me to do his PhD on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, I was extremely happy. I really wanted to take him under my supervision, but due to some technical reasons, he could not register under me. Maybe I didn't have vacancies or something like that. There are some technical reasons I could not take him. But I'm glad that Dr. Saket is doing his poetry PhD in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. And more than 7 or 8 research scholars have done their PhDs on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra under my supervision. Varieties of topics I have given them, like myth and folklore in the poetry of Mahapatra. Sometimes I give topics like language, the language of Jayanta Mahapatra. And then sometimes I give some comparative studies of Jayanta Mahapatra, the historiography of Jayanta Mahapatra. So many topics come when you read his poetry, and if you have a thinking mind, you will actually end up, getting so many topics on his poetry. And currently, one research scholar is working on corporeality and body politics in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. And what all we are doing in that research, I will definitely come to that. But then, for the sake of the students sitting here, let me give a little bit of information regarding the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. I write in the critical introduction to my book titled Reading Mahapatra, Selected Poems. The book elegantly sums up the relationship that I shared with Mahapatra in names synonymous with the foundation of Indian English poetry. He is synonymous with Indian English poetry. Jayanta Mahapatra, 1928 to 2023, is the first Indian English poet who received the Sahitya Academy Award in the year 1971. And he is considered as one of the founding fathers of Indian English poetry alongside Nizam Ezekiel, A.K. Ramanujan, and some other poets. A prolific writer, he has published more than several collections of poetry and few prose pieces also. And a bilingual poet, he has written several poems in his mother tongue, Odia, which is my mother tongue as well. So I have the good fortune of reading his poetry both in Odia and English. And his autobiography, Bhor Motiro Kanafulo, I will talk about that text, Bhor Motiro Kanafulo. It's a pertinent and most important text. And I would recommend the scholars sitting here, whoever is working on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, to definitely read that book, Bhor Motiro Kanafulo. It has not been completely translated to English as of now, but many scholars, including Professor Subhanu Satpathy, he has also translated a part of it. Many scholars are translating parts of it, Bhor Motiro Kanafulo, from Odia to English. And Professor Goparanjan Mishra has also translated quite a few poems of from Odia to English, the poems of Jayanta Mahapatra, and everything is available online. His poetry offers a wide canvas of themes from familial relationships to the depravity of the variety of the representations of cultural landscapes of Odisha and India. Some of his important works are A Reign of Rights, Relationship, Bare Face, and Hesitant Light. In fact, all the poetry collections of Jayanta Mahapatra are very, very important. When I did this book, I wanted to do a complete Jayanta Mahapatra reader. I wanted to take all his poems and put it in one reader, but it was practically impossible. Somebody who has written so much, like people doubt that Shakespeare was a company, not a man. Probably after 100 years, people will doubt that Jayanta Mahapatra was a man or a group of men. When the time may come, people will say that, is it possible for one man to write so much? He has written that much. And then, Jayanta Mahapatra reader was not possible because somebody else was already doing it. So I collected many of his important poems, published and unpublished, and some poetry books which were out of print. I collected them. And then in this book, I have tried to create a new light on Mahapatra's poetic imagination. The critical introduction, almost 100 pages, it covers the poet's entire career, starting from his early poems to his most recent publications. There are several scholars like John Oliver Perry, M.K. Naik, and Bruce King, and Madhusudan Prasad. They have critically looked at Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry vis-a-vis post-colonialism, modernism, and symbolism. Everyone talks about that. But I think very few critics have looked at the mythology and folklore, and also the corporeality and body politics in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. And that is where I have tried to fill the gap. When I did this book and the title Rereading Jayanta Mahapatra, sir was very happy. He said, Nandini, you created a space for rereading my poetry through a different spectrum. So by doing this book, I think I have initiated the readers to read the poet in conjunctions with life, how he was close to life. The psychoanalytical approach of this book, it sheds light on the aspect of Mahapatra's poetry, which were rather silenced by the critics. And referring to his autobiography, I have interwoven the details of his personal life with their varied representations in his poetry in this book. This is a new way of reinterpreting some of his poems. For instance, this book points out that Mahapatra had a loving relationship with his father, which is reflected in the poetry collection Whiteness of Bone in the year 1979. He talks about his dying father, and he remembers the daily rituals his father used to practice when he was home. Jayanta Mahapatra had a tough life. The man and the poet were so different. I used to tell him that you have a deceptively simple, romantic, and beautiful smile. I used to tell him because there was a storm inside the heart of the poet. He had his share of pains and sufferings and sorrows. His only son passed away very early. Then, madam, his beautiful wife, who looked like Cleopatra. I have one poem where I have talked about Jayanta Mahapatra and madam, comparing the beautiful lady to Cleopatra. If I get time, I'll recite that poem for you here. And then Jayanta Mahapatra, his Christian identity was not in tandem with his love for Hindu mythology and folklore and the Jagannath temple. So these two things were never in tandem, but also he never created any conflict between the two. He knew how to maintain a balance and how to camouflage the pain, the suffering, the sorrow of a poet through words. As I told you already that he was the word wizard. In his poetry, word wizardry will actually capture your imagination. Mahapatra's complex relationship with his past is said to have affected him in ways that he himself did not understand. Whenever you asked him about his past, he would avoid. He had a deep sense of humor. If you would ask him a question and he did not want to answer that, he was very clever. He was like a child, childlike innocence and childlike smartness and cleverness. I'm reminded about one incident, when I was doing my PhD on his poetry. I was pretty young at that time. I had just completed my MA. And then in one of his poetry collections, I saw the small letter I for myself. For I, the letter was small letter I. And then I asked him, there is a small letter I in your poetry? And he says, don't ask me. I said, "Tu matte pacharna." He will say in Odia. If he didn't want to answer, he will say, "Tu matte kich pacharna to." He will say like that. No, don't ask me anything, just go from here. That is how he would respond. So I said, okay, fine, I'll not ask you, then I'll write something on that. And then what I did, I wrote a complete research paper. That paper is also open access. You will find it on the internet. The small letter I in the macrocosmic world of poetry. So I just compared a big universe, a macrocosmic world, where the poet thinks about the smallness of I, myself. I am so small that for myself, I'm using the small letter I 2-3 times. I wrote that paper and I was very proud. Somebody passing out from master's degree and then immediately getting a JRF and doing PhD and then writing research papers will of course bask in the glory. Now I remember those days and then I smile to myself that how I used to be. Then I went with those research papers to Katak. And then I showed him the papers, research where I said, see, I wrote a paper on your poetry. The small letter I. You didn't answer to me. Now see, there is a research paper on that. That in the macrocosmic world, you would think the microcosmic you. Such a small man in such a big world, so small letter I. Then you know what he did? He just looked at my paper with a smile. Then he says, oh, that small letter Y, I was a typographic error. He said that. So, and then imagine That research scholar writing a research paper on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, and then being so happy about that paper, so proud of the paper, and the poet dismisses it. That no, it was just a typographic error. I was so angry. I shouted. I said, "Why didn't you tell me earlier when I asked you about the small letter? You said, don't ask me. And now that there is a research paper, you are dismissing my paper. I'm not going to forgive you for this." Then he said, "No, you don't have to forgive me, my dear. You just publish your paper. Because when I write something, after that, I disown that. I don't belong to that anymore. When I write something, it belongs to you, to my readers. So this is your poem. This is your research paper. This book is yours. You just take it. Take everything." He was a giver. He believed in giving. He gave love. He gave affection. He gave compassion. He just gave everything to everyone. I have seen personally, in my own eyes, I have seen how he has given life to many people, to the marginalized, to the subaltern. His domestic help and her entire family, he had given them a piece of land. He had given them a home. He had given education to the entire family. He has just given. He has not taken anything from anyone because he was so complete in himself. He was so happy and so satisfied in his mind that anyone will just fall in love with him. Last year when I went to meet him, no, 2 years ago when I went to meet him, I took silver nimbu mirchi with me. Two, three lemons in silver and 2, 3 mirchi chilies in lemon, a silver bunch. I took and I gave it to him. I said, you put it somewhere in your house. Then he says, "Why so?" Then I teased him because he used to call me his granddaughter and I used to call him my son. So we used to also tease each other sometimes. I said, "You are so handsome. People can have an evil eye on you. So this nimbu mirchi for you." And then he had a very bright smile on his face. So somebody at 94 and somebody who is losing hope and who is not keeping well, not able to walk clearly, properly, you tell him that you are so handsome, look at you. So this nimbu mirchi to protect you from the evil eye. He was very happy. And then he showed it to Gopa sir. And then also he asked his cook to put it at the entrance of his house. He said, "Put it in the entrance of the house so that no evil can get into my home because my child has brought it for me." And I hope till today that nimbu mirchi would be hanging in his house. Someday if I go to Katak, I'm going to see that because Tinikonia Bagicha is a temple for me. That is not just a home. That is not just a house. That's temple for me and for many, many scholars like me. People who have been inspired by the great Jayanta Mahapatra. That home is but a temple, isn't it? Now let me quote from my introduction to this book. His mind lurks in the poet in quest of something that he himself is not aware of. He was not aware of his mental strengths. I have tried to unveil the complex relationship of the poet with his cultural and his racial past and his personal past by probing deeply into his psyche through his poetry. Looking into the past is like rereading his poems in a different context. People look at the great poet Jayanta Mahapatra gracing the occasions like the literature festivals, but I made it a point to look at his racial, his cultural past, and his familial past. I focus my attention on the recollective modes of Jayanta Mahapatra. In a poem titled Grandfather, the poet remembers reading the old yellow-stained diary of his grandfather. Let me quote, Mahapatra holds his grandfather accountable for the pessimism in the family because of his absence. The reawakening of the memories of his grandfather through the yellow diary becomes both a way of joy and sorrow. This is what I have written in the introduction. The poet is seen negotiating not only with people, but also with some of the past spaces he has occupied. I tried to decipher the ways in which the remnants of his childhood home, along with the people who used to reside in it, continued to disturb him. Quoting some lines from Mahapatra's poem, The Dispossessed, let me quote a couple of lines. "There is a photograph still hanging on the wall in my father's house. It is quite old, and against the elaborate backdrop, the photographer used are my parents, my younger brother, and I. I want to shut it from my mind because it reminds one of the useless me of one of a useless monument. So here, recollection is not exactly helping him. There is a gripping effect that the space still has on the poet. He seems to seek comfort from his past, and some other times he is seen continually negotiating with his notion of home, what it means to him after so many years. Because I would say that after the death of his beautiful wife, after the death of Madam, and then a couple of years after that, his son also died. Home was just kind of house for him. He never felt the homeliness of home after the death of his near and dear. That is why he feels lost at home and continuously probing into his actions, his failures. I have a critical engagement with the psychological underpinning of the poet's poems by researching and by searching for connections between his home and family members who are now deceased. I'm relooking for his forgotten familiar faces in this book. The transformation of the poet in terms of his transition from writing love poems to writing poems on larger issues of life is also discussed in this book. His early poetry was very, very romantic, and in the early part of his career, Mahapatra used to write extensively on the themes of love and loss. Mahapatra views love as a seminal need of the mortals. His maturity as a poet reflects in his poetry subsequently when he started writing about the history of India and his locale. He talked about Odisha, about the Konark temple, about Jagannath Puri. The preoccupation with the past stays the same in his poetry. Only now he is reflecting on the past by focusing on historical incidents. Let me quote my own book. The present, which seldom comforts him, seems to be a sheer support system to reach back to the past. The past, with in my book, is referring to his cultural past. In doing so, I'm attempting to reread the progression that Mahapatra has undergone from being a personal poet to being a poet writing about the collective history of a country and of a shared tradition. In this book, my research talks about how safely aware Mahapatra was of the traditional Odia customs and the binding power of Lord Jagannath. His familiarity with the rich cultural past of Odisha stems from the strained relationship he shares with his Christian identity in a land dominated by Hindu tradition. The whirlwind of emotions that the poet experiences in connection with his position in the Odia society is linked to his fractured religious identity between Hinduism and Christianity. His grandfather had converted to Christianity during the devastating famine in the year 1866. Let me quote my own introduction. The one aspect of the cultural heritage of his native land is that he is never tired of portraying the religious rituals and worship in these temples. Mahapatra also feels burdened and is affected by the legend of King Ashoka and the Kalinga War and the idyllic history of Odisha. The poems like Dawn at Puri and Relationship depict the multifaceted relationships of the poet with his traditional and cultural past. Now, moving from the past of the poet to the contemporary scenario of the country to present, let me do a new historicist approach. Mahapatra doesn't only write about the mythology and folklore of the country. He also talks about the contemporary problems. For example, his poem Freedom. He talks about freedom. What does it mean to us today in the 21st century, in the third decade of the 21st century India? How do we look at freedom? So he subscribes to liberal thinking, and then he moves from the past to contemporary society. And then this research, this book also talks about the contemporary Indian degenerative situation. In the introduction, I write about that. And Mahapatra, he quotes the Lost Children of America, and then the 25th anniversary of a republic. These are the poems from which I have quoted in the introduction, and I've talked about the contemporaneity of the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. He is not just a romantic, he doesn't just imagine things. If you look at Indian political scenario, now, and then make a comparative study of that with the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra as a new historicist or as a cultural materialist. Particularly the researchers sitting here, I would recommend that to look at the literary theories like new historicism and cultural materialism and try to understand the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. Look at the poem Freedom. Look at the Lost Children of America. Look at the 25th anniversary of the Republic. And then you make an anthropological research of the Anthropocene and of the contemporary Indian political scenario, and then go back to the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. You will feel that while writing, he has one hand in his pen and the other hand in the contemporary socio-cultural and the political scenario of the country. He is a poet of the land. He doesn't just romanticize. He talks about the important and political issues and the debates. He is a poet who believes in witness literature. He talks about the society. You know, in the court of law, the witness plays a very important role in social change. I mean, in the change of the case. Similarly, in the scenario of literature, the writer can play the role of a witness for a more inclusive and positive society, to create a more inclusive society. Poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra practically does it. He creates a more inclusive society by being compassionate to everybody. I will come to the gender aspects of his poetry when I talk about corporeality and body politics, but please allow me to quote myself from my own research. Let me quote, even if the poet has a sense of belongingness to the present, he is agonized because of the fleeting nature of time. He thinks about time. Just few days before his death, he wrote a poem which I would call a champu. It's a poetic prose where he extensively talked about his body. What all should be done to his body? He wrote about that. His wish, his desire. The poem was almost his will. So imagine the power of the poet who probably knew that every time I go to the hospital to the ICU, I come back, but this time there is no coming back. He knew that there is no coming back. So he wrote for the first and last time, he wrote a poem which was more of a will than a poem. A part of that poem, my teacher, Professor Goparanjan Mishra, clicked and sent me just before his death. When I read that poem, I started crying. I said, stop him from writing such poetry. Why the hell he is writing this kind of poetry? But then Gopu sir could not do anything. He was taking care of him till the end. Many people were taking care of poet Jayanta Mahapatra till the very last day of his life. Some of them were my teachers and some of them were my fellow poets. And one, Mr. Samantrai has also done a lot for the life and for the happiness, for the living of Jayanta Mahapatra. Well, Mahapatra is seen to be taking huge leaps across the centuries when he writes. He leaps from one century to another, perhaps in search of some steady grounds and feeling the remote past in the present, but he was not comfortable in the past either. See the irony? When he was uncomfortable in the present, he tried to go back to the cultural and the racial and the personal past. But when he was uncomfortable in the past, he came back to the present. He loved the present. He lived in the moment. And the poems in this collection, I mean the rereading Jayanta Mahapatra, this collection, they shed lights on the various modes of interactions through which Mahapatra reflects and dwells on the past. His personal relationships, his friendships with many people, the Odia society, Odia food, historical past of the state, all collide to form a huge backdrop of his poems. The poems that have found a place in this collection have been carefully curated by me, and so glad I did it in consultation with the poet, of course. And I hope that this book not only serves an entirely new point of view for the readers and the researchers who have never read Jayanta Mahapatra, but this book may also be helpful for academic looking for a comprehensive critical reading of his poetry. Here I reaffirm the importance of rereading Jayanta Mahapatra, as his poems are evergreen, and the more one reads Jayanta Mahapatra, the more there is to discover. Like I said, the poetry of T.S. Eliot and the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, every time they will take you to a new space. Here, I have reiterated the crucial role of Mahapatra that he has played in the shaping of the legacy of Indian English poetry. Now, I would take you. Do I have time, Dr. Sakir? Do I have time?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Okay, can I take another 10 minutes?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Yes, ma'am, please.
Okay, this is a new area, corporeality and body politics in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. As I have given this title to one of my researchers, and she has started working on that. So I'll give a little bit of information on the body politics that Jayanta Mahapatra creates in his poetry. Before I do that, let me take you to his Odia autobiography, Bhor Motira Kanafulo. Bhor, early morning. Moti, Motira Kanafulo, the earring. Moti, you understand Moti, right? So early morning, when what I understood out of that, because if you ask him a question, you will not get an answer. I just remember when I was pretty young, his poetry collection, Close the Sky 10 by 10. The title of a book is Close the Sky 10 by 10. Then I said, 10 by 10, is it mathematics? And then I went to ask him, I said, what do you mean by 10 by 10? Then how can you close the sky? And then 10 by 10, 2 by 2, 1 by 2, what is this? Then he didn't answer to that. He said, take it as you like it. Just you understand whatever you want to understand. He really didn't answer to my question. So then I interpreted that in a way, and many other critics have interpreted Close the Sky 10 by 10 in multiple ways, and everything is open access. You can just go to the internet and check the significance of the title, Close the Sky 10 by 10, and you will find 100 interpretations. So this is what he did to human minds. You know, Jayanta Mahapatra, I used to tell him that you are that kind of a virus who will attack the human brain. You will attack the human mind. I used to tell him. Then he was so angry. You calling me a virus? I said, no, you are that kind of a poet who can get into the heart of a reader. People cannot just read and forget you. People will carry you in their hearts. And today I am doing that. You are doing that. Everyone is doing that. Well, now coming to, I'm so sorry that from academic, every time I'm going back to personal. Forgive me for that. Well, corporeality and body politics in Jayanta Mahapatra's poetry has dealt with men and women in all their diversity, ranging from sons and daughters and wives to beggars, brothers, prostitutes, and poor women. He wrote a lot about prostitutes. His compassion, his empathy, you will find in many of his poems. Despite being a man living in a world of patriarchy, Mahapatra surprises us with his force and the subjectivity, the objectivity while dealing with female and male bodies. He dealt with the human body. Like in the Bor Motiro Kanafulo, if you interpret that autobiography of Jayanta Mahapatra from masculinity studies point of view, you will understand the challenges of a man. The persona, the protagonist in that book, he talks about his failed masculinity for some specific reason. And then after some time, he talks about the completion in the relationship, the fulfillment in the relationship of a man and woman by keeping the woman on a higher pedestal. How the woman has helped the man to make a man of him. So maybe he's the only Indian poet, I may be wrong, he's the only Indian male poet who talks about his own failed masculinity and then his own successful masculinity with the help, with the support of the female. So he talks about the body, he talks about his own body as well. He talks about the body of women, the body of men. For Mahapatra, the mind and the body are intimately fused together in a union which becomes elusive for many of us. His treatment of the corporeality of women can be categorized into spiritual, mythical, and sexual. The last line of lines of the poem Relationship, I was just reading it now, where he goes to the Konark temple and then he asks, just let me quote, you must have been to the Konark. You see the beautiful female bodies, beautiful women with, beautiful body. He writes that, tell me your names, dark daughters, hold me to your spaces. In your dance is my elusive birth, my sleep that swallows the green hills of the land and the crows that quicken the sunlight in the veins, and the stone that watches my sadness fly in and out of my deaths, a spiritless soul of memory. The dark daughters, the beautiful female bodies on the Konark temple, his glorification of their beauty, not just physical, but spiritual. So when he talks about the body, the corporeality, every time I read that, somehow my mind is transported from physicality to spirituality. So, women are categorized into spiritual, mythical, and sexual bodies in his poetry. Not that he doesn't write about the sexuality of women, he does write it very clearly. Within his large literary output, the corporeality occupies significant space and it has evaded recognition for half a century. His poetry is full of corporeal references, both male and female bodies, and he continuously negotiates between the material and the immaterial worlds. Metaphors look at bodies that are spoken about in their raw forms, forms that are part of the reality surrounding us. He continuously lifts the body into the language and sometimes carries language back into the body's interior. Through the corporeal, Mahapatra is addressing the politics involved with defining and redefining the body and also the body of a society. Man and woman, their bodies, and the body of a society. A transition can be traced in his poetry, where his early poems deal with bodies in a strangely personal manner, and then gradually his focus shifts into incorporating bodies violated by the society and the surrounding power structures. Now, what kind of theoretical framework I would like you to take here? Just look at body politic, Politic, look at body politic, and then look at body politics. They are so different, students. Please don't confuse between body politic and body politics. Look at both of them differently, and then look at the poetry of Mahapatra. Body politic is a socio-cultural term implying the fabric and the structure of the state, right? When you talk about the state, like Desha, Nadu, Rajya, you talk about the Desha. Earlier, Odisha was a Desha. Now, Desha means country. India is a Desha. But there was a time when, people would go to their village and then you ask, where are you going? I'm going to my Desha Gaon. So, village was Desha. So, Desha, Nadu, and Rajya, if you understand these three cultural and political concepts, then it will be easy for you to understand the body politics and then gradually take it to the interpretation of poetry. So body politics is a it's a socio-cultural term implying the fabric and the structure of the state. And body politics is a term in feminist literary discourse, in feminist theory, as it is used. And the body politic, it is a medieval metaphor that compares a nation to a corporation. Body politic in Western political thought is an ancient metaphor by which a state, a society, and its institutions are conceived of as a biological body. So comparison of a state to a biological body. As it is usually applied, the metaphor implies a hierarchical leadership and a division of labor, and it carries a strong power structural connotation. That is body politic. Now, ask me, how do I take body politic to the poetry of Mahapatra? I will go to that. Now, next, the term body politics, it talks about the powers at play in both body politic and body politics, including institutional power expressed in law, disciplinary power extracted in economic production, discretionary power expressed in consumption, and personal power negotiated in intimate physical relationships. So he talks about the state, Desha, the Nadu, the Rajya, the country. He talks about the body politic, and then he takes it to very crafty that he is. He takes it slowly to body politics by talking about, a negotiated power in intimate physical relations. Now, again, let me go back to the Bhor Motiro Kanafulo, his autobiography, where in the first few days of the marriage, the man and the woman, they go to the bed, but there is no consummation of the marriage because of probably You have to only imagine, nothing is written very clearly, but what I imagine or understand, due to the pressure of masculinity, of performance, of the best, being the best man on earth, maybe because of that pressure is in the mind of the male, so he is not able to fulfill, to consummate the marriage for the first few days. Then in due course of time, the female body, the female protagonist in the scene, she takes over. She takes over the responsibility of making the man the man. She helps him, probably she negotiates with the two, both their bodies, and then in a way, the female body, she helps in the consummation of the marriage, the consummation of the man and woman relationship. And then the next part of the book glorifies, adores the female body who has completed both the man and the woman. So here, if you look at the political scenario of a country, if you look at the panopticon, who is in the center and who is in the periphery, if you look at Plato and the idea of the panopticon, initially the man is in the center and the woman is in the periphery. The man is in the power structure, the man is in the powerful position, and then he is trying to negotiate some kind of power. But in due course of time, there is an exchange of the roles. The woman comes to the center and the man goes to the periphery, and the woman helps in the completion of the relationship. And in the power structure, the so-called power structure between the man and the woman, what works is love. For anything and everything, Mahapatra has the capacity of taking you to a kind of negotiation through love. He will take you to a place where love plays the major role. So even here in the man and woman relationship, in the body politics between the man and the woman, in the intimate physical relationship, and the personal power is negotiated by the power of love. And then the marriage is complete, the marriage is consummated, and then life becomes beautiful. Mahapatra has left all his ego in his poetry. For him, poetry is the best ego battering exercise. Through words, he has left his ego and superego, and he has become a poet of love. If you ask me to define Mahapatra in 3 words, I will say poet of love. Individuals and the movements engage in body politics when they seek to alter the oppressive effects of institutional and interpersonal power on those whose bodies are marked as inferior or who are denied rights to control their own bodies, especially women. By putting into use the theory of the bodies, which demand refiguring of the body so that it moves from the periphery to the center of analysis, so that it can now be understood as the very stuff of subjectivity. So from this kind of subjectivity of man-woman relationship, he goes to the objective or the impersonal relationship of the nation. And this research focuses on the multitudinous aspects of the body and their impact on Mahapatra's poetry. Focus has been delivered to the imagery and nativity in Mahapatra's poetry, and there is a need to reinterpret his poetry from a different perspective. Let me quote George Bernard Shaw. I'm quoting here. Using the concept of body politics, scholars have studied the status of women and racial minorities and somatic or body nerves generated in particular cultures and individuals, appropriation or rejection of them. Now, if you apply this idea of G.B. Shaw to the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, there is a need to recognize the importance of bodily experiences in order to rethink the way the inside and the outside of a human being interacts in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. There is a continuous relationship between our corporeal exterior and the physical interior, and Mahapatra's poetry is a witness to this kind of an exchange. The physical features of human bodies are shaped and reshaped by the social concept. Let me quote Nietzsche. The body is a great intelligence, a multiplicity with one sense, a war and a peace, a head and a headsman. For Jayanta Mahapatra, body is war and body is peace. The bodies are flexible in his poetry, which can be sharpened by the work and the vigilance of the owners, and thereby, concretize the relationships between the body and the self-identity. Bodies are no longer conformed, they are bound to their physical limitations, they are witnesses to social procedures, and they serve as a storehouse of the human psyche to Mahapatra. To Jayanta Mahapatra, the corporeality doesn't remain individual. It transforms into the universal, beginning with a particular woman who used to be the poet's neighbor. You can read it in the Bhurmatiro Kanafula. He talks about a neighboring girl. So in his body politics, he begins with a particular woman who used to be the poet's neighbor in Cuttack to becoming a representative of a collapsing cultural tradition of Hinduism, which has meted out injustice to women over centuries. He is a feminist. He talks about many religions, including Hinduism and Christianity and all the religions, which has done injustice to women over the centuries. And Jayanta Mahapatra's autobiography points out very clearly that he wants justice and fair play for all the three genders. His poems like The Temple, The Hunger, The Whorehouse in Calcutta Street, How High Is Your Smile, and many other poems, they focus on the representation of the female body. And his poetry has a larger understanding of how male identity is affected and constructed and reconstructed based on specific caste and class. He also talks about caste and class. Mahapatra's observation works differently while dealing with his own body and while talking about the marginalized men and the privileged men. He talks about the body of the marginalized men and the privileged men, how their bodies function differently. He has the craft even to do that. And he also talks about how the male bodies and the female bodies differ from each other. Okay, before I conclude, I would just like to give you some information. I have an interview with poet Jayanta Mahapatra. It was a very old interview. I had taken it on 19th October 2012, and it's published. It's also open access in boloji.com. That is one journal. In the interview, there are a few interesting questions. I'll just conclude with one or two questions that I asked him, and he answered. So Nandini Sahu is asking Jayanta Mahapatra, sir, could you please tell me why poetry is important to you? What kind of a question is this? But anyway, I asked it to him. And then he said, I cannot deny that writing of poetry has been a cathartic means for me to purge myself of the various imperfections in my life. This has been more so in the beginning stages of my creative career, I suppose. Poetry's cleansing effect was important for me. The sort of relief I experienced when I finished a poem filled my whole being. Gradually, however, the sharpness of this feeling Yes. Gradually, however, the sharpness of this being disappeared as I went from poem to poem, and poetry became crucial for me. It became a need. It's strange how certain things come into your life and never let you go, like a trap. And so, poetry held me like a mysterious disease or an illness. So, in 2012, just a few years ago, he said that poetry is like a mysterious disease or an illness to me. And then next answer, he contradicts himself when I say, how do you begin to plan a new poem? I asked him, how do you plan a new poem? Then his answer is very, very blunt. Sometimes, you would say a sentence and then you would say, period. Period and full stop. You can't ask him anything else. He would be angry. But then I had the audacity, even when he was angry, I nagged with him. I asked him more questions. Sometimes I called him at 8 o'clock in the evening. After his dinner, I would call and ask him, have you eaten? Are you okay? Then he would shout, why have you called me at this time? Put the phone down. And my answer is, no, I'm not going to put the phone down. You tell me about your health, then I will put the phone down. So I had that kind of a hold on him as a person. Anyway, so I asked him, how do you plan a new poem? He says, no, there is no planning whatsoever when I go on to a new poem. Maybe very, very few poems of mine have been planned. I think a poem like Grandfather was planned. There was history behind it. Or else a new poem emerges out of a sudden feeling, perhaps a phase, a phrase, an idea, a consciousness of something, or a consciousness of my own self. I began writing late in life, and I knew nothing about writing a poem then. It was a kind of hunger that words could fill. See, hunger is a recurrent imagery in his poetry. He says it was a kind of hunger that words could fill. At times, those words could make a poem. Mostly, they failed to make the poem. I left to my inner sense to complete the poem, and the process was intuitive, explanatory. And then I asked him, what is the relationship between the voice of your discourse and your writing voice? So the voice of discourse and writing voice, his voice of discourse was so different. Whenever anybody would ask him a question about his poetry, he had his escape route. He would say, no, don't ask it to me. I'm a professor of physics. I don't know any English. His answers were so typical. He would say, I'm a professor of physics. What English do I know? Don't ask me any English. But then probably if anyone knows the best of English, then it's poet Jayanta Mahapatra, isn't it? So when I asked him the difference and the relationships between the voice of his discourse and his writing voice, his answer was, I feel the question has a great relevance for those writers who do their creative writing in English. Well, in this context, I am reminded during one TV program, a lady was taking an interview with me and poet Jayanta Mahapatra, and then the lady introduced him. Here is the poet Jayanta Mahapatra. And then she introduced me. Here is Indian woman. Here is the Indian English poet, woman poet Nandini Sahu. Then I was very annoyed. I told the lady I told the gentleman, a man was taking the interview. I said, okay, so I'm so glad that you have used so many adjectives for me. Indian English, woman poet writing in English. But please have the decency of introducing the gentleman sitting beside me properly. You just said poet for him. So that was some kind of satire that I did. But Jayanta Mahapatra took it very seriously. He took it to heart and he took it to his mind. And then whenever he met me, he said, here is poet Nandini, and then here is Jayanta Mahapatra, Indian male poet writing in English. He used to say like that to make me laugh. So this answer also resonates with that. I mean, most of the things that I talk or write about him, they have a history. So he says that I feel this question has a great relevance for people who write in English. And in India, one cannot ignore the fact that English as it is spoken differs from state to state, from one part of the country to another. Let me not go into this particular angle. I would like to think that my speaking voice goes into my writing voice almost, I would say. But even this isn't true. For example, if I consider a word like otherness, quote unquote, otherness, it would merge perfectly into the English poem I am working on. But this word would not generally be carried in the voice I am using to communicate with another person. But perhaps I don't understand these things. He always was very clever. He said, I don't understand things, but he understood everything. I belong to a generation where language was a formal medium. The literatures I have read, and I have intensified this idea through them. It would be hard for me to use the speech of the new generation, the digital generation. I would be content to keep my writing voice similar to my speaking voice in the poetry. Finally, I would conclude by saying that I would like to write the language I have learned all these years, period. Then when he said period and he put a full stop, then Nandini has the audacity to ask him one more question, what would you advise to the, I have a question. After period, okay, I ask him, what do you think are the good poets in Indian English poetry today? He says, good poets? I don't know. I would not know. Every poet has a good line or so, including me, including you. But good poets are hard to find everywhere, period. So this is how he responded to the questions. And this is a very lengthy interview. It is already in the boloji.com. And Delhi University former professor of English, Professor Tapan Basu, is editing a book of my interviews. I mean, many people who have taken interviews with me, and I have taken interviews with only two people, Professor Jayanta Mahapatra and Professor Manoj Das. So those two interviews are included in that book. And many people who have taken my interviews, I think some 30-40 interviews will be in that book, which Professor Tapan Basu is editing, that will be printed by the end of this year. And this interview will also be a part of that book. If you have time, please go through it. And well, if you want to do any research on the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, if you think that I can be of some through my interviews or through my theoretical reading of new historicism and cultural materialism vis-a-vis the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra, please get in touch with me. My email ID is nandinisahu@igno.ac.in. Presently, I am working on some major research projects on Indian knowledge systems, IKS, and also Hindu studies, where I would definitely be taking the discourses that Mahapatra created, as a couple of chapters will be there. If you want to contribute to my research on Indian knowledge systems, please feel free to get in touch with me. My dear friends, Professor Yahya is here, and my dear student and my dear friend, Dr. Saket is here. They will guide you how to get in touch with me. Thank you for giving me this opportunity. If you have anything to say, please feel free. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am. A very informative session. Before I move on to asking questions, if anyone is having any question, few things which I would like you to add on. Uh, I have read several of his interviews. A very interesting line he always says in most of the interviews I have find that uh, everyone, many of the poets have got their works published by the age of 38. And he says he's the one who started writing from the age of 38. But after this, he always adds it was because of the sufferings and the pains which came out through the poetry. Because he couldn't have said that in any other manner to anyone. So, ma'am, please say something on it.
Well, yes, I have also read this sentence in many of his interviews that he had personal pains and sufferings. Like I said, look at the body politic and the body politics in the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. You will see how the microcosmic personal pain and suffering is slowly taken to a macrocosmic world where he talks about freedom of a country, a nation. So nation, nationality, nationhood, and also talks about the sufferings of men and women, everybody. So his personal pain and sorrow transports to the pain and sorrow and suffering of the world. And then somehow he could combine everything, create a queer amalgamation between the pain, sorrow, suffering, and also the happinesses of himself and the world around, and then communicate it through poetry. Yes, he started writing poetry pretty late. He was a professor of physics. He taught physics, but in many of the interviews, he says that physics is my background. Physics taught me about the universe. But mind you, when he was not writing poetry, he was reading literature all the while. In many interviews, he says that he was reading the great masters of the world, big critics, starting with Foucault to everything. You just take the name of a literary critic and a theorist. Jayanta sir had read that critique. If you see his personal library in Tinikunia Bagicha, you will be surprised. We are people of literature. We also have libraries. Like you can see my personal library at the background of this lecture. But his library was so rich. He read many languages. He read translations. So he was shaping up his poetic career even when he was not writing. Maybe he was waiting for time to be ripe enough so that he could write poetry. And personally, he had told me he wrote his first poem on a day when he was very happy, not he was very sad. On a very happy day when he went out with the love of his life, and then he had he had the finest feelings with him. Then he just wrote something, he just scribbled something, and it came out to be a poem. Then it went on. He didn't publish for some time. He kept on writing in a notebook. And then he wrote about his pains, his sufferings, his sorrows. And as I told you, he had a lot of pain in his life. His religious and cultural identities, and early death of his wife, and the moving away of his son to another country, and the early death of his son. Apart from that, many other family and personal and social issues which created a lot of pain in the heart of the poet. Now, Of course, you will agree with me that the way of looking at pain and suffering of a common person and a poet are always different. If you are a poet, you will look at the suffering of the world in a different manner. During COVID, lot of COVID literature came. Poets wrote poetry on COVID. One of my poetry books, a song half and half. 67 poems I wrote on 67 days when I was confined to my COVID bed with blood saturation coming to 80, and I did not know if I'll survive. When half of Delhi was suffering from COVID and many of my friends died at that time, I was confined to my house, to my bed, all by myself. My survival strategy was writing poetry. So maybe for poet Jayanta Mahapatra also, his survival strategy was writing poetry. Maybe that is the truth. Had he been here today, I could have called him right away and asked him, read out your first poem to me and tell me why did you write it. He would have shouted at me, but I would have nagged. But then it's not possible.
Yes, ma'am. As it is said, uh, poets never dies. He will always remain with us through his poetries, undoubtedly. This is for sure. And if there is anyone who wants to ask any question, can unmute and ask the questions. Anyone? Okay. Uh, if not, then we are moving ahead. Now, I would like to invite Professor A.K. Dash, sir, to propose the vote of thanks.
Thank you, Saket. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, sir, you're audible, sir.
Before I begin to speak my vote of thanks, one thing I remember, and one thing which has all the time been impressing me is that, which Saket had just now reiterated, poets have got two lives, one on this earth and another in heaven. Even if they go to heaven, they remain alive with us through their books, through their works, which perpetually guides us, which perpetually makes us sensitive or sensitized to the wider aspects of life in this world or beyond. I must be failing in my duties if I don't say some words about Nandini ma'am, the way she has presented the things today before us, before our students, is really very insightful. She has not only spoken her interactions with Jayanta Mahapatra, but ma'am, you have also given us a chance to rediscover Jayanta Mahapatra, rather to reinvent Jayanta Mahapatra in certain other lights and colors which we were not knowing hitherto. You have spoken, ma'am, about your personal interaction, and you have also told what type of poet Jayanta Mahapatra was, and you have assimilated in your speech different aspects of the poetry of Jayanta Mahapatra. You have covered entire range of Jayanta Mahapatra as a man of humbleness and politeness, from his dealings on the themes of love and loss to the larger aspects of life. He was not only a poet of imagination, but a poet of the land, which we could say Matiro Munisar. Okay? And then you have also told how he has assimilated his concept about body politic and body politics, and how he has been able to explore man-woman relationship to prove that man is incomplete without woman and vice versa. You have also spoken of a journey from physical to mythical to spiritual, and you have also spoken how he used to give a reply evasively And I think there was a design behind his being evasive, because he wanted the poetry to be interpreted by the reader and not to be biased by the opinions of the poet. Ma'am, it was a very insightful lecture that you have delivered before us. It has certainly widened the uh, horizons of the research scholars who are present here today and our students, and that will certainly benefit them in the long run. I, on behalf of myself and on behalf of the Department of English, Karim City College, extend my heartiest thanks for accepting our request and to make us privileged with your presence.
Thank you.
I once again thank her for being with us this evening for such a long time and enlightening us. I also extend my thanks to the wonderful audience that have joined with us tonight, today evening. And I also thank students, uh, teachers, and other research scholars from Jamshedpur and also outside Jamshedpur. Thank you all once again.
Thank you so much.